It was the first time Janis Joplin performed Me and Bobby McGee after recording it. Halfway through, her voice broke completely. Not cracked, not wavered, gone. Janis collapsed on the stool, sobbing. The song about the man she loved stopped. The arena went silent. Then a woman in the seventh row did something that saved the performance and changed Janis's life forever. October 9th, 1970. The Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco. 5 days after Janis Joplin recorded Me and Bobby McGee in a single take at Sunset Sound Studio in Hollywood. She had recorded it on October 1st. She had not performed it live before. Not once. She had kept it close, the way you keep something that costs too much to share carelessly. The song was personal in a way that her other songs, for all their emotional force, were not. It was a conversation with a specific person, Kristofferson, a man she had loved briefly and completely in the way she loved everything, without managing the distance, without protecting herself from the cost. He was somewhere in South America. He did not know she had recorded his song. She had not told him. She was planning to surprise him when the album was finished. When Pearl was done and in the world, and she could call him and say, "I recorded your song. I made it mine. I hope you don't mind." The Winterland show had been planned for months. It was her city, San Francisco. The city that had taken her in when Port Arthur had finished making her into a target, and she had needed somewhere that would let her be exactly what she was. The crowd of 4,000 people gave her a standing ovation before she played a single note. They knew. Everyone knew. For 90 minutes, Janis performed. The Full Tilt Boogie Band supported her. The audience was with her completely. The specific warmth of a hometown crowd that has watched someone become something extraordinary and feels a kind of quiet ownership in the becoming. Then, near the end of the show, Janis sat down alone on a stool with the microphone. The lights dimmed. The band stepped back. The crowd fell silent. "This is a new song," Janis said quietly. Her voice was already unsteady. "I recorded it last week. I've never sung it live before." She paused. "It's for someone who doesn't know I recorded it yet." She positioned her hands. She nodded to the band. And she began. The opening was soft, achingly, quietly beautiful. When she began to sing, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Busted flat in Baton Rouge." The first verse came out strained but present. Janis's eyes were closed, tears already on her face, but her voice moved through the melody with the specific sureness of someone who has been living inside a song for a long time before singing it. She was not singing to the crowd. She was singing to Kris. Only to Kris. The audience sat in absolute silence. Then, as Janis moved into the second verse, something happened. Her voice cracked. Not the small crack of emotion pushing through technique. A complete fracture. The sound stopped in her throat. She tried again. Nothing came. Just air. Just the terrible absence of the thing that had always been there. Janis sat on the stool and looked out at 4,000 people and could not make a sound. Her mouth was open. The band played one more bar and then stopped, one by one, uncertain, until the Winterland Ballroom was completely silent. Janis put her face in her hands. Her shoulders began to shake. This was not a performance. This was a woman who had held a song so close for so long that the moment of giving it to a room had broken something open that she did not know how to close. The specific grief of something being said for the first time. The specific terror of love made public before the person it was meant for had heard it. The Winterland was dead silent, except for the sound of Janis Joplin crying on stage. The band stood behind her, instruments at their sides. The road manager stood frozen in the wings. 4,000 people sat in the dark and did not move and did not speak. Because there are moments when silence is the only honest response, and everyone in the room understands this simultaneously and without being told. Janis tried to speak into the microphone. She could not form the words. She tried to stand. She sat back down. She was alone on stage with a song she could not finish for a man who had not heard it yet. Then from the 7th row, left of center, a woman stood up. Her name was Ruth Abernathy. She was 53 years old. She had been a session singer in the 1950s and 1960s, had sung backing vocals on dozens of records that nobody remembered, had spent 20 years lending her voice to other people's music. She had come to the Winterland that night the way she came to every show she could manage. Because music was the thing, the only thing. That had always been the thing. She had been watching Janis since before Monterey. She had watched her become. She had been in the 7th row when Janis's voice disappeared. When she heard the crying carrying through the quiet hall. When she understood what was happening in the specific way that singers understand what happens to other singers when the voice stops in the wrong place. Ruth Abernathy made a decision. She stood up. She began to sing. Not loudly, not performing, just singing. The melody of Me and Bobby McGee, from the beginning, in the specific register that said, "I know this song. I'm here. You are not alone in it." The people around Ruth turned to look at her. Then the people behind her turned to look. Then the people further back became aware of what was happening in the 7th row. A woman standing alone in the audience, singing the song that the performer could no longer sing. Quietly, without theatrics, without asking for anything. Just holding the melody until the person it belonged to was ready to take it back. Janis heard her. She lifted her face from her hands. She looked out into the dark toward the voice that was carrying her song through the silence. Ruth's voice was not Janis's voice. Nothing was Janis's voice. But it was steady, and it was there, and it was singing to her from the 7th row, the same thing James Mitchell had said to Eric Clapton from the 10th row in the Royal Albert Hall, without saying any words at all. Finish it. He is listening. Janis stood up slowly. She took a breath that shook her entire body. She looked toward the wings where the band was waiting. She nodded. They came back in, one by one. Janis turned back to the microphone. Ruth sat down. And Janis began again. This time, her voice was different. Still raw. Still broken in the places it had broken. But underneath the rawness, something had steadied. She had fallen apart, and a stranger had held the song until she could hold it again. That meant something. That meant everything. As Janis sang, Ruth sat in the 7th row with tears on her face. She was not crying because it was beautiful, though it was. She was crying because she had been singing in the background her whole life, and had just done the only thing that had ever mattered. She had held the melody for the person who needed to carry it. Just for a moment, just long enough. When Janis reached the final chorus, something happened in the Winterland ballroom that nobody who was present has ever fully described in a way that does it justice. 4,000 people began to sing with her. Not loudly, not in the way of audiences performing their enthusiasm. Quietly. The way you sing something when you understand that the singing is not for you, but for someone else. The way you sing a lullaby. 4,000 voices, barely above a whisper, carrying one woman's love song through the dark of the Winterland ballroom, toward wherever Kristofferson was on the other side of the world. When the last note faded, there was no applause. Just silence. The sacred kind. Janis sat on the stool and held the microphone and cried for a long time. Not from the inability to continue, from having finished, from having said the thing that needed to be said. After a long moment, she stood and looked out into the audience. She said, "There is a woman in the 7th row who held my song for me when I couldn't hold it." She paused. "I don't know her name." Ruth sat in the 7th row and did not stand up. She did not need to stand up. She had done what she came to do. After the show, Janis's road manager found Ruth near the exit. He brought her backstage. Janis was sitting on a folding chair in the corridor outside the dressing room. She looked up when Ruth came in. She said, "You didn't have to do that." Ruth said, "Yes, I did." Janis looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been singing?" Ruth said, "All my life, mostly in the background." Janis said, "That was not background." They talked for 40 minutes in that corridor, about music, about what it costs, about the songs you carry for so long that singing them the first time breaks you open in ways you didn't anticipate, about holding things for people when they cannot hold them themselves, about the specific courage of standing up in a dark room full of strangers and singing one verse of a song because someone needed the melody more than she needed her seat. Janis did not know, when she walked back out to the car at the end of that night, that she had 5 days left. She did not know that October 14th would be the last show. That October 4th, which had already passed, had been the last recording. She thought she was going back to Los Angeles to finish Pearl. She thought there were more nights like this ahead. More songs held for her when she couldn't hold them. More strangers in 7th rows who understood what needed to happen and stood up. There were 5 more days. Janis Joplin died on October 4th, 1970. Me and Bobby McGee was released on the posthumous album Pearl in January 1971. It reached #1 in March, her only #1. Kristofferson heard it for the first time the day after she died. He was driving through Tennessee. He pulled the car over. He could not move. He had not known she had recorded it. She had been planning to surprise him when Pearl was finished. The surprise arrived, just not the way she planned. Ruth Abernathy went back to her life. Session work, the background, the way she had always been. But she kept the ticket stub from that night. She kept it for the rest of her life. And she told the story whenever someone asked her what the most important thing she had ever done with her voice was. Not the sessions, not the recordings, not the decades of background singing that had paid her rent and kept her working. The night she stood up in the 7th row of the Winterland ballroom and held a melody for a woman who needed to carry it and could not carry it alone. Just long enough, just one verse, just the specific, unrepeatable kindness of a stranger who understood what was needed and stood up.